Today we're going to break down the shocking reality hiding right behind the myth and discover what actually happened to history's most legendary warriors when the sun went down. Let's dive in. Just to give you an idea of how deep this fear really went, you have to look at what happened when a Viking died. So imagine someone in the family passes away. You'd normally just carry the body out the front door, right? No way. Not the Vikings. That was considered way too dangerous. Instead, they had this incredibly bizarre, honestly chilling burial custom. They would physically smash a hole straight through the wall of their house, shove the dead body out through that makeshift gap, and then immediately patch it right back up. Why go through all that trouble? Because they were literally terrified that if the corpse used the front door, it would remember the way back inside. They believed there was something out there in the darkness so horrifically dangerous that it scared them more than any rival army ever could. You see, we have to contrast their legendary bravery with the deadly reality of surviving a northern winter. Up near the top of the world, winter doesn't just mean it gets dark a little early. It practically erases the sun altogether. Imagine the sun setting in autumn and just not truly coming back until spring. And this wasn't just spooky, it was lethal. If you were inland on a clear night, the temperature could plummet past minus 30 degrees Celsius. That is over 20 below zero Fahrenheit. It was literally cold enough to kill you before morning. So the reality is that for half the year, an entire family would just be completely sealed inside one dark, smoky, cramped room, while this freezing, pitch-black night stretched on outside with no end in sight. Which brings us to Section 1, Monsters in the Gloom, the creatures born from winter's darkness. You know, when you spend 6 straight months locked in a dark room, it becomes so incredibly easy to believe there's something lurking right outside trying to get in. To make sense of that oppressive environment, the Vikings told stories. Their very first big myth explained the darkness itself. They genuinely believed that 2 massive wolves were up there, constantly chasing the sun across the sky. And the great fear was that one day, those giant wolves were actually going to catch it, swallow the sun whole, and just drown the world in permanent darkness forever. But wolves chasing the sun? That was just one piece of the puzzle. Just outside the glow of their firelight, the dark belonged to the trolls. And forget the cute little fuzzy creatures from modern fairy tales. These were giant, lumbering, vicious things that could crush a man with ease. They absolutely owned the night. Why? Because the one thing a troll could not survive was daylight. The very first touch of the rising sun would instantly turn a troll into solid stone. So obviously when it got dark, smart Vikings stayed inside and desperately prayed for the sun. But here's the real twist. Staying inside didn't actually keep you safe. The most terrifying things? They came for you indoors. Yeah, the worst threats came for you while you were fast asleep. They called this creature the Mara. The Vikings believed the Mara would creep right into your house at night, sit heavily on your chest, and just crush the breath out of you while trapping you in terrible dreams. You couldn't move a muscle. You couldn't even scream. You'd just suddenly wake up in the pitch black, violently gasping for air. Sound familiar? It's basically exactly what modern science calls sleep paralysis, that horrific jolt of waking up totally frozen, convinced there's a demon sitting on your chest. In fact, Mara is exactly where we get the English word nightmare. And it wasn't just humans. Farmers would constantly wake up to find their horses completely soaked in sweat, shivering, with their manes tied into knots by the Mara. But as genuinely terrifying as the Mara was, it was not their ultimate fear. That title went to the draugr. Okay, imagine a dead body climbing out of its grave to walk the earth. But, and this is absolutely crucial, this was not some see-through floating ghost. Oh no. The draugr was the actual physical corpse. Swollen, rotting, and impossibly strong. We're talking strong enough to crush a horse barehanded. No human alive could fight one off. And the worst ones? They were so incredibly foul, they literally rotted the land around them. There's this one saga where a draugr gets so utterly toxic that birds flying overhead just drop dead out of the sky. Cattle die in the fields, and an entire valley literally had to be abandoned. And the absolute worst part? They specifically rose up in the dead of winter and could smash their way right through your front door. So remember that hole in the wall we talked about earlier? That whole crazy burial process was specifically to stop a draugr from finding its way back inside. Now, if one did rise up, there was really only one way to permanently put it down. First, you had to dig up the grave. Second, chop off its head. And third, burn the entire body down to ash. There is this incredibly creepy story in the sagas about a dead shepherd named Glommer. He turns into a draugr, climbs onto the roof of a farmhouse in the middle of the night, and just starts slamming his heels against the beams until the whole house shakes. Anyone who met him outside either dropped dead on the spot or completely lost their mind. It finally took a legendary hero named Grettir to wrestle Glommer to the ground. But right as Glommer is dying, the moonlight hits his rotting eyes, and he curses Grettir. He curses him to forever fear the dark. And it worked. Grettir, the absolute legend who killed the monster, could never bear to be alone in the dark ever again. Section 2. Seeking the Dark. The seers who walked into the pitch black. Because this brings us to these absolutely fascinating exceptions in Viking society. While literally everyone else is barricading their doors, praying the undead and the trolls don't get them, there was a specific, brave group of people who purposefully walked right out into that freezing night. They called it utasetta, which translates simply to sitting out. A seeress, a woman the Vikings believed possessed the power to see the future, would walk out into the night completely alone. She'd find a burial mound, a literal grave, and just sit there in the freezing darkness for hours. What was she doing? She was actively trying to wake the dead to pull secrets and prophecies out of them. The Vikings believed in this dark magic so intensely that they eventually had to ban it by law. The legal texts explicitly outlawed, and I quote, sitting out to wake up the trolls. I mean, just think about the sheer courage that took. While the toughest warriors were cowering indoors, she was out there, sitting on a grave in the pitch black, actively calling the monsters up. Moving on to Section 3, Winter Feasts and Oaths, how indoor confinement sparked the Viking Age. So, for the vast majority of people who weren't out sitting on graves, how did they actually survive those agonizingly long nights trapped inside? Well, here's the crazy part. That exact same darkness, the very thing that terrified them to their core, is where they became truly unstoppable. They ended up creating this insanely loud, vibrant indoor culture that literally sparked the entire Viking expansion.
One of the ways they passed the time is honestly going to sound like something straight out of modern pop culture. They had literal rap battles. Seriously, they called it flighting. It was this fierce, verse-based insult battle where two people would just stand up and start hurling rhythmic insults at each other, totally making it up on the fly. You see, in the Viking world, your reputation was basically your currency. It was the only thing you truly owned. So having a razor-sharp tongue was respected almost as much as being good with an axe. If you froze up and couldn't think of a comeback, man, you could be publicly shamed for years. They went right for the jugular, insulting your bravery, your looks, your family, everything you stood for.
To give you a sense of just how completely vicious these battles could get, check out this quote. It's from the most famous mythological flighting match ever recorded. So the trickster god Loki crashes this grand feast, right? And he just starts tearing into every single god in the room, one after the other. He even locks eyes with Odin, the literal king of the gods, the All-Father, and accuses him of practicing women's magic and creeping around disguised as a witch, basically calling him a coward to his face. I mean, if the gods were going at it like this in their own mythology, you can only imagine how intense and how deeply personal these battles got when you were crammed around a winter fire with your neighbors. Eventually, once a year, all of this pent-up cabin fever energy would just boil over into the biggest, loudest, craziest gathering of them all, Yule. Yep, the exact same word we still throw around at Christmas today. Right in the middle of the darkest, most depressing time of the year, when food was running low, they threw a massive, multi-day bender. They'd sacrifice animals to the gods and literally paint the walls with blood, hoping to buy a good harvest for the next year. And at the absolute peak of the feast, warriors would step up, place their hands on a sacred boar, and swear these massive, unbreakable oaths out loud to the whole room. They'd promise to win a specific battle or hunt down a specific enemy. Those legendary raids that absolutely terrified Europe, they didn't start on a beach somewhere. They started right here, in the freezing dark, months before a boat ever launched, fueled by ale and a whole lot of peer pressure. Section 4. The True Creators. The secret weapon behind the Viking longships. Because look, an oath is just words, right? To actually turn those drunken boasts into historical reality, something physically had to carry all those warriors across the freezing open sea. And this brings us to the ultimate twist of this whole explainer. The real secret weapon behind the Viking expansion wasn't the oaths they swore, and it wasn't even the iconic wooden ships themselves. It was something entirely different. When you close your eyes and picture a Viking longship, you almost certainly picture the wood. You see the carved dragon heads, the long sweeping hull, the rows of oars. But the wood is not what pushed that massive ship across the open ocean. The sail did. And that sail? It was made entirely of wool. Historians have recently crunched the numbers on this, and what they found is just mind-blowing. The woodworking, the part we all obsess over, that was actually the easy part. Crafting the woolen cloth for just one sail took roughly 30 times longer than building the entire wooden ship. I mean, just look at this number, 1,000. A single long ship sail was so insanely massive that it could swallow up the wool of more than 1,000 sheep. And every single tuft of that wool had to be painstakingly washed, combed out, and spun into thread completely by hand before they even started weaving it on a loom that was literally taller than a person. This chart puts the whole thing into a stunning perspective. If you break down all the labor required to build a fully functioning Viking warship, spinning and weaving the cloth makes up a staggering 97% of the total work. The famous woodworking, just 3%. So what does that actually mean? It means that without a room full of women sitting indoors, spinning wool in the dark all winter long, there simply is no Viking Age, period. Without that hidden labor, you literally just have a bunch of angry guys with axes stuck on a beach. And the wildest part is that weaving wasn't even the bottleneck. It was the spinning. Hand spinning that much thread was an agonizingly slow process. To make the thread for just one single warship sail amounted to roughly 50 years of human labor. Let that sink in. 50 years. There is absolutely no way one person could do that alone in a lifetime. It took dozens of women working together relentlessly, trapped indoors in the dark all winter long, just to finish a single sail. This endless, constant indoor labor became so defining for the era that it left a linguistic legacy we still use right now. Think about the word spinster. Today, it usually means an older, unmarried woman, sometimes with a negative connotation. But back then, it literally just meant a woman who spins. It was a highly respected title that reflected how essential, how constant, and how absolutely vital this winter work was to their survival. It is undeniable proof that the hidden labor of these women was the true engine driving the entire Viking conquest across the globe. So, when you strip away the famous longships and the fierce warrior myths and the tales of undead monsters, what are you actually left with? You're left with a deeply, deeply humanizing picture of history. The legendary Viking Age wasn't built by fearless gods. It was built by ordinary people, crammed into a smoky room, huddling around a fire, absolutely terrified of the dark. They were arguably the most frightening people on the planet at the time, and yet they spent their winters fighting their own fears, just like anybody else. Which really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If the fiercest warriors in history were secretly terrified of the night, what other legendary myths are out there right now, just hiding beautifully ordinary human truths? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and we'll see you next time.